Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Cool Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheists United Studios. Hey Joey, composer Aaron Copland used to talk about the gifted listener, the trained musician who reacts emotionally to a piece of music, as everyone else does, but also reflects on the music's inner workings to understand why the piece affects us in the way that it does. In truth, not all pieces of music are worth the effort of analysis, but those that are tend to be the ones that stick around. The same is true for stories. When we think about a fairy tale, we might recall the basic plots and characters, which are simple by design. But the more we think about them as gifted receivers of stories, the deeper these stories become. At least this is true for fairy tales worth retelling, as today's guest has done in new and thought-provoking ways.
We're delighted to chat with Mastaneh Moghadam, a licensed clinical social worker and executive director of the nonprofit Cross Cultural Expressions. She wrote and directed the film The Djinn in the Pen and wrote the screenplay for Wake Up, Sleeping Beauty. Mastaneh, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak with you, Jonathan and Joey. I appreciate it.
So getting right into it, what do you see as the role of popular media in counseling and therapy? How can movies in particular communicate information that improves our well-being?
I've worked as a psychotherapist now for almost 25 years. And I know that the first thing that I ask when a client comes into my office is I ask them to tell me their story. And it's really through stories and storytelling that we uncover not only a lot about the world around us, but also about ourselves and our psyches and our relationships to those world around us. A lot of those stories become the myths that we follow because they really tap into not just interpersonal, but also universal themes that really connect us and carry us through all kinds of different cultures and circumstances.
Much of your work involves counseling the Iranian community in Los Angeles. Is there an affinity within Iranian culture that makes using the arts particularly effective, maybe an appreciation for the dramatic arts in particular?
So Cross Cultural Expressions, like you said, is a nonprofit, and it's really about bridging cultural gaps, exploring cultural diversity, really celebrating cultural diversity and the uniqueness of each culture, while at the same time emphasizing that at the end we are all one, right? We're all part of this human chain. And so as we celebrate individuality of the culture, we also want to give voice to the fact that a lot of us go through the same universal themes regardless of the cultures. So to that end, cross-cultural expression was really created to uplift humans, uplift the human experience through therapy, education, and the arts. And so while, yes, we do obviously work with immigrant and refugee populations, I myself am Iranian, so we do work a lot with the Iranian community, but we also work with the Russian-speaking community, the Spanish-speaking community, the Arabic-speaking community, and obviously the English-speaking community. So we do work with a very diverse group. And our counseling center offers therapy to those communities in their specific language, and also just following like the cultural components of what that entails. So why did we put therapy in with the arts? Well, it kind of ties back into the first question, right? Because we really view arts from that, or therapy from that narrative perspective, which means that everything is a story. And therefore, stories and myths and storytellings are very, very collective in the way that all cultures have myths. And in fact, most cultures have the same myths told in different ways, meaning that you're going to see repeated stories that follow the same storylines and capture the same kind of, significance and underlying meaning and symbology, told through variations in character and place and identity. Iranian, Persians have a very, very ancient culture. They've maintained their culture through the many, many different invasions that have happened to that country, really through myths. I mean, if people are familiar with the works of Ferdowsi, the Shahnameh, which is the Book of Kings, this is a book that has lasted for thousands of years, and it's all mythical storytelling, really done through poetry. And so poetry and storytelling and mythology is a huge aspect of Persian culture and Iranian culture. There's also another part of it is that, psychology, it's a new thing. It's really a new thing. This quote unquote science of psychology is a new thing in the world. And so a lot of the older, more collectivist cultures don't exactly feel comfortable or buy into what we would consider like that Freudian or Jungian psychoanalytical kind of psychology. So a lot of times there's so much taboo around mental health and psychology and mental illness and getting services. So going through, trying to, again, bridge that by introducing psychological themes through stories and movies and storytelling is a way to engage a culture that might feel like approaching them with, come into my office kind of psychotherapy would feel overwhelming or even intrusive into their lives. So in that way, I think we hit it on two levels. One, that it is such a culture. It is a culture that's always used the arts to heal itself and also to really find a new way to, going back to an old way to engage the community.
Your 2020 film, Wake Up, Sleeping Beauty, has two versions, one with a Russian-speaking cast and one with a Farsi-speaking cast. Your new film, The Djinn in the Pen, was also geared towards these two communities. What led you to make these choices?
Wake Up, Sleeping Beauty was actually supposed to be a play. It was supposed to be a theatrical production. And so, we got this partnership and we got this funding from Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. And we hired our actors and our casts and our director. And we had the script that I wrote in English was not only translated, but also adapted to fit the Persian culture, as well as adapted to fit the Russian culture, the Russian-speaking culture. Those are the two communities that, again, because we work with both of those communities a lot, we kind of chose to engage. And then we're halfway through rehearsals for our theatrical production and COVID happens. And so COVID happens, everything goes on shutdown, as does our theater piece. And so we kind of waited 2 months, 3 months, got these extensions. And then at some point, the Department of Mental Health said, shut it down. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to the theater for a good long time. So shut it down. And so we just thought, this is crazy to shut this down because we put so much work, so much time, so much effort into this. So we requested that they allow us to film it. And we literally had, by the time they approved our request to film it, to the time that this was due, we had like 3 months. And so we kind of approached both of the directors, and we said, just film like an elaborate table read. because also the stipulation from the Department of Mental Health was you can film it, but none of the actors could be in the same room together because it was like high COVID time and there's liability. So however you want to film it, but nobody can be in the same room together. So the wonderful directors, both of them kind of sat with their own vision of how they're going to film this. And the Russian, the director of the Russian piece, Max Derain was his name. He decided to do like this Zoom thing and put the actors really, he went and he decorated everybody's rooms and then had them sit separate rooms. And it was really crazy how much time went into that. And then Sheila Vasu, who is the amazing director of the Farsi version of that movie, decided to put her own time and resources behind doing like these, crazy special effects where she actually filmed everyone individually and then put it all together through green screen, which was just like, to do that in a 3-month period, it was astonishing. I guess she was bored because she was just sitting at home, had nothing else to do with COVID. I don't know what it was, but as a result, we got these 2 distinct movies, which was amazing. It was really amazing, but it was supposed to be actually just a theatrical piece. But based on those and based on the fact that in both communities, there was a lot of positive response, the Department of Mental Health said, well, why don't you now actually make a movie? And so we were able to repeat that again this past year with the Djinn pen.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because all 3 of them have a very distinct kind of visual vocabulary, a distinct look to them. And I was wondering about, the timing of these films and how that might affect, particularly the Wake Up Sleeping Beauty, those 2 films, how that might have kind of impacted the creativity about the visuals, because they do look a certain way. And I think from all the different examples of people making things during COVID, I think they're very successful in terms of convincing the audience that this is everyone together at the same time. That's remarkable what they were able to do.
Yeah, it was unbelievable and it really was interesting to watch, like, both of those directors really kind of go off and go with their own vision of what the same story is going to look like.
Yeah, and both of those movies are inspired by fairy tales. Wake Up Sleeping Beauty, of course, by Sleeping Beauty, and The Djinn and the Pen by Aladdin. And both deal with how trauma and the fear of change can trap us in the past. These, as you mentioned, are very universal themes, but it seems like maybe they're particularly relevant to immigrant communities in a very profound way. Was there a particular reason why you chose these specific fairy tales to put in your films?
We have a wonderful, incredible person, Dr. Mariam Sayod, who is actually the director of arts and education at Cross Cultural Expression, and she is a mythologist. And so the reason why we decided to work with a mythologist goes back again to the link, the really, in my view, profound link between mythology and storytelling and psychology. And so when we first decided to do a theatrical production, which then became the movie, we really wanted to tap into those universal myths that are out there, because again, we knew we were telling the story for not only the Iranian community or the Persian-speaking community, Farsi-speaking community, but also the Russian-speaking community. And so we thought, what a better way to do it than to tap into these fairy tales, which are very universal. And so we really started to examine the different myths and try to see where we can find like a modern day voice within these very old myths. It was just inspired as Mariam researched the stories and brought them to me, and we really got into like the psychology of them and the universal themes and the archetypes that are being explored. And then we started to tie those into 20 some years of me seeing clients and what do I see most and what are the blocks and what are we looking at. We really felt like this Wake Up Sleeping Beauty really makes sense, or the myth of Sleeping Beauty, kind of modernizing it. We had focus groups with both of the communities, the Iranian community as well as the Russian-speaking communities. And in the Iranian community, the Women Life Freedom movement had just happened. So there was a lot of unrest. There was a lot of death. There was a lot of people being triggered because of the politics and the tragedies that were going on, that still continue to go on in Iran. And at the same time, there was the Ukrainian war, the Russian-Ukrainian war. And so that's where we tied it into the whole Djinn and Pen, really trying to focus in on this idea of grief and loss, because as an immigrant, really universally, but specifically as an immigrant, just the immigration process in itself has so much grief. You're dealing with complex traumas, complex losses, multiple losses. And so that's what we really tried to address. And, the Djinn and the Pen, even though it looks like it might be one movie, actually the Russian version, which maybe you didn't see, is adapted for the Russian communities.
There's a pivotal scene in The Djinn and the Pen when the Djinn laughs at the woman for saying that her mother's death is a fact. The Djinn says that facts imply permanence, and there's no permanence in our ever-changing world, just stories we tell ourselves, which can sometimes make our lives stagnant. Could you elaborate on this?
It's funny. As you're reading that, the therapist in me wants to say, well, what do you think it means? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Well, sure. So, that was a pivotal scene in the film, and I have thought about it. The idea that, things happen, real things happen, but our response to those things is really what sort of makes those things have a sort of take on a life in our own minds and shapes the way we view things that occur. So I think, that you're not going to argue with someone who says that the loved one is dead, but how you respond to that and how you frame that death within your own self-story can either be positive or restrictive in the way that the film is, I think, teaching us. That's my take on it, because there is no permanence. And part of that is each one of us views experiences that occur, things that happen in our own way.
Beautiful. That's the brunt of it. There's so much that people view as, well, it's a fact. This is a fact. And yet there's so much that is really in the hands of our own perceptions and our own life experiences and our own traumas and our own fears. What we really connect to as a fact of our life, so much of it is just how we're viewing this thing. I think it's very clear, especially now with all the social media, that you can pretty much find any facts to support anything you want. And so the brilliance of this is, and I know a lot of people get very angry at this, but the brilliance of it becomes in that moment when you start to recognize that even facts aren't really that permanent. That even facts through a different lens, through a new perspective, really can be fluid. Another way to say it is manipulated, but I want to soften it a little bit because I don't want to necessarily give it a negative connotation, but it can really be more fluid. So even those things that we view as, well, this is fact, is a little bit more softer. It's not that dense normally. And I think this was the invitation, especially when you're going through grief, things become so dense, everything becomes so burdensome and so heavy. And you start to justify a lot of that by bringing in things that this is a fact. It's a fact that death is wrong. And so how do you work through that? Well, a lot of it is softening the language and softening the perception. We never want to villainize the emotion, and we certainly don't want to villainize anybody's experience or make any of that wrong. You're experiencing whatever you're experiencing, and that's fine, and it's necessary, but you got to be able to move through it. And I think that's really the big message, if there's any message into that movie, is really the idea of how do you work through it.
So as you said, a lot of the work that you do is geared towards perhaps decreasing stigma around mental health issues, sort of telling people from these different immigrant communities who maybe are Arabic speaking or Farsi speaking or Russian speaking, that it's healthy and important and essential to talk about these issues. And you have a number of short videos on your website that have just little lessons, things that we might in the Western world think are basic, things telling us that, LGBTQIA plus people are not in any way abnormal, and these kinds of things that, again, we might take for granted, but might be taboo in some of these communities. I'm just wondering if you found these to be effective, if people have come to you saying that you've helped them to work through different issues, that kind of thing.
You can't ignore what's going on in society because, again, it's so deeply connected to people's mental and emotional health and well-being. And so in a lot of our more collectivist cultures, right, which the whole world is to some level more collectivist too, it's really difficult. It's really challenging to kind of expand and explore things that feel scary or unsafe. And so, again, that's what we're trying to do, just bring light to those things. When something stays in darkness, it rots. I think we've made tremendous shifts, particularly with the Iranian community, with the LGBTQ plus acceptance. I think it's helpful. I think all of it is helpful. So we're just trying to, one brick at a time. We don't need to crash the whole wall or anything. But yeah, we definitely got very, very good responses from those YouTube clips that we created, the PSAs. And I think the best part of it for each of the communities is that they came from members of their own community. So it wasn't like some other community kind of lecturing them about stuff, but it was people from their own community speaking their own language.
I'm wondering if you have any other film projects or artistic projects in the works that you might want to share about?
The film project is to be seen. We really, Mariam and I in particular, we really had it in our minds to do the fairy tale film projects as a trilogy. So we are very much hoping that funding will get renewed for us to complete that trilogy. So we're hopeful with that, but nothing's set in stone with that. But what we do have in the works right now that we're working on is actually a book. And it's a coffee table book that is really going to focus on stories from community members around the immigration process and how that process affected their mental, emotional, physical, spiritual bodies. And really to try to incorporate with that just some information around mental health, healing. And so we're also looking to incorporate art in that. So we're trying to make like this coffee table book. We want it to be very beautiful. Coffee table book that will have the essays in there from community members, and also information that will hopefully be useful.
Yeah, that sounds terrific. And Mastaneh, thanks so much for joining us. And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.